Good morning, everyone, and welcome to your morning briefing for Thursday, the 19th of February, 2026. This is Robert. Jared and I will be standing in for Mike today. Let's get started with Inside the Beltway. So, a group of Democrats plan to hold their own, what they're calling People's State of the Union next week to counter President Donald Trump's State of the Union. Organizers of the event said that Senators Chris Murphy and Representatives Pramila Jayapal and Greg Kazar, among other Democrats, are going to attend this event. And there is some divide among Democrats on how to respond to the State of the Union. Some are going to show up and protest. Some are going to skip the State of the Union event. And in this case, the Trump resistance is going to hold their own counter State of the Union. I am going to watch and see what they have to say, because at least two of these Democrats, Chris Murphy and Pramila Jayapal, have been heavily involved in a lot of the Trump resistance activities with Indivisible and 5051. Over at the White House, people familiar with the matter said that White House officials, including White House advisor Stephen Miller, are quietly pushing congressional Republicans to renew spying powers under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, Section 702. This is a reversal of the previous position of Trump and during the 2024 campaign, and famously, FISA warrants were used to investigate his campaign in 2016. So I think the question here is, why would Trump reverse his position if he does publicly come out and support the renewal of FISA 702? I think the obvious reason is that this is a power used and that they are likely using in foreign policy and homeland security missions right now. Interestingly, this doesn't get talked about a lot, but the NSA also uses FISA section of 702 to support immigration enforcement, which I think is likely another reason why, especially Miller, is pushing for this renewal. I think it's also possible they plan to use FISA to go after foreign Antifa groups, because we have seen the Trump administration did start pushing the State Department to declare foreign Antifa groups as foreign terrorist organizations. And all over at the State Department, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the U.S. is going to impose visa restrictions on 18 additional Iranian government officials, telecommunications industry leaders, and their family members. These visa restrictions, the State Department said, are going to target individuals complicit in serious violations of human rights. And this brings the total of Iranian officials hit by these visa restrictions to 58. Over on the domestic side, yesterday in Minneapolis, Minnesota, police said that they are investigating an alleged arson that targeted a memorial for the anti-ICE activist Renee Good. There was a journalist near the scene that said that a pile of wood near the memorial was doused with gasoline, but according to police, no one was injured and the damage was minor, and they are still investigating it. And as far as I can see, have no suspects. Also in Minnesota, the Twin Cities Tenants Union and 5 Minnesota labor unions, these are the Service Employees International Union shops, 2 of them in Minnesota, Unite Here Hospitality Union, the Amalgamated Transit Union and Communications Workers of America, which together represent, according to them, 25,900 union workers in Minneapolis and St. Paul, said they are going to hold the largest rent strike in 100 years on March 1st to demand an eviction moratorium from the state government. And the Twin Cities Tenants Union said they are supported by 4 Minneapolis City Council members. So as far as what they're saying they're going to do, it looks like the Twin Cities Tenants Union is new, and they are going to start petitioning the renters around Minneapolis and St. Paul to join this rent strike, with the goal of getting at least 10,000 residents in Minneapolis and St. Paul to join the rent strike. I think this is another structure test for a general strike, because it wouldn't just be a labor strike, but really, as far as the far left and Democratic Socialists and progressive activists have said, is really more of a whole society strike. So in this case, not paying rent, not making purchases, non-union workers striking, or union workers who aren't authorized to strike, doing things like what they call a sick out, which is when an entire shop calls in sick. And this is also obviously an attempt to put pressure, I think, on Minnesota officials to speed up the promised drawdown of Operation Metro Surge. But though I don't think the Trump administration is actually planning to draw down Metro Surge quickly, or really all that much, based on the recent comments from Board Czar Tom Homan. One important point here, though, I think it's becoming clear that Minnesota, and especially Minneapolis and St. Paul, they're becoming a major center of gravity for the organized resistance. And as we reported last week, Democratic Socialists of America organizers who put together that 23 January economic blackout, it said that there were more days of action coming. There were more of these this building up of capacity and testing where they are and getting a general strike underway. And they said that they're trying to push a general strike into the consciousness of the working class. So I expect DSA Twin Cities would be leading the way on this, and this is one of the reasons why I think Minneapolis and St. Paul are going to become a major center for resistance activity. According to an internal Homeland Security investigations memo obtained by the New York Times, HSI directed employees to review all open and closed voter fraud investigations that involve immigrants. They're looking for immigrants who registered to vote or voted in elections before they granted citizenship. New York Times said that White House official Anthony Salisbury is also overseeing a White House election fraud working group, and this working group includes HSI, the National Security Council, and some Department of Justice officials. I think this is a precursor to a push for denaturalization. At the end of last year, the Trump administration directed the federal branch to start getting more of these denaturalization cases going. And this would be one of those instances like that they have, if they have voted or registered to vote illegally, they've committed a crime. And I think this is going to be one of the precursors to opening up more denaturalization cases. All right, Jared, if you can come on and take us through the global SITREP, please.
Will do. We're going to start off over in Washington, D.C. The White House is hosting the Board of Peace today, and the press secretary yesterday said that, first off, $5 billion so far has been pledged towards rebuilding Gaza, and that there will be more than 20 countries represented in that meeting today. Going north of the border, Canada's immigration minister published several new categories of preferred immigrants for permanent residence yesterday, and this includes foreign military members joining the Canadian Armed Forces. Now, the foreign recruits must have served 10 years in their former military, and the Canadian and they have to have a job offer from the Canadian Armed Forces to apply for this as well. The Canadian Armed Forces are actually authorized to offer positions as far as general intelligence, signals intelligence, flag level leadership, and weapons maintenance to these foreign personnel. Now, this wouldn't be as concerning because it would normally be something like, Germans, British, French, more than likely the French. If it weren't for the fact that Carney has been pushing on the middle pole of power and has a renewed strategic partnership with China. So there is concern that that may be on the table at this point. Speaking of China, next month, Taiwan will hold the Tiananmen exercise for the first time in 30 years. This is a coastal defense exercise on their eastern coast. So you can see it here on the map. It actually, southeastern coast. But this is the fact that they're renewing this after 3 decades of absence shows that Taiwan's taking it much more seriously, that they're likely to face action in the near future. South Korea also had some pretty significant news come out. The defense ministry said this morning that they're going to push to reinstate a no-fly zone near the border, and this is to partially renew the 2018 Inter-Korean Military Pact. The unification minister, which oversees or is the primary liaison for reuniting South and North Korea, said that he's already talking to the United States about reinstating that pact to prevent unintended clashes on the border. And this isn't a preparation for war, but actually a preparation for peace to avoid war. The 2018 Inter-Korean Military Pact actually ended up leading to President Trump's stepping into North Korea in 2019. And lastly, the IAEA Director General is warning Iran that they're running out of time. They're to achieve a diplomatic solution before the U.S. finishes its military buildup. Grossi, the Director General, did say that he did tell Bloomberg he's actually directly in contact with the Iranian foreign minister to try to achieve a diplomatic solution on Iran's nuclear program so that the U.S. doesn't end up repeating Operation Midnight Hammer on Iran.
Thank you for that, Jared. We're going to move on to the Homeland Operation SITREP. So according to this criminal justice reform nonprofit, it's called FWD. 287G agreements between ICE and local police departments have increased by 900% since January 2025. This is an increase from 135 to 1,372 agreements. A little bit more than half are with local police departments, 40% of them are with sheriffs, and 7% with state law enforcement agencies. This is one of the significant obstacles the Trump administration has faced in deportation operations. It's a lack of capacity, and a lot of this has to do with the spread of sanctuary jurisdictions. So what these 287G agreements are, there's basically three models they can follow. There's a model called the task force model. That's where local police are put together in task forces with ICE, where they go out and they enforce the administrative warrants and the final deportation orders. There is the prison model, which is the most well known, where the jails and prisons in states can detain or hold illegal aliens who are in prison and or have final removal orders for ICE to come pick them up. And then there is also what's effectively a deputization model, where after special training, local and state police are effectively deputized, and they can have they have the power to, in limited cases, enforce federal immigration laws during the normal police duties. And this combined with apparently an internal DHS memo that said ICE may arrest and detain refugees who have failed to adjust to lawful permanent resident status after 1 year, looks to me like a more indicators that the Trump administration is expanding the deportation capacity, of the immigration enforcement capacity. So this memo came out in court this past week in a lawsuit in Minnesota. And in this memo, DHS has directed ICE, or said that ICE may arrest and detain these refugees because the refugee status is conditional and it's subject to a mandatory review after 1 year. And I think in this case, they're saying that refugees that fail to apply for a green card are effectively now eligible for deportation. And this is, I think, on the Trump administration's part, an expansion of that authority to arrest and hold refugees until they can screen them. I think with the idea that inevitably some of them are going to be sent back. I think this is also trying to build on that Ninth Circuit court win a few weeks ago over ending the temporary protected status programs, where the Trump administration is going to say that in the case of some of these refugees that have failed to apply for green cards, that whatever conditions existed to justify them being admitted to the United States no longer does, and they can be sent back home, which is, I think, likely to end up with another court fight. I think the strategy here, though, is to get a court fight going that will give the Trump administration the power to make that determination, or at least enshrine that power in a court case. Also, the anti-ICE resistance is now tracking ICE contractors. This came from a far left blog that I read, and they launched a website called Melt ICE Oregon. They're trying to, in their own words, map the financial ecosystem behind federal immigration enforcement. And they're using publicly available federal contract information to find Oregon-based businesses that hold contracts with ICE and Customs and Border Protection. They had a call to action as well, and they want other far left and anti-ICE organized resistance individuals and groups to use this government data to find businesses in their own states. And they all encourage them to also map out the deportation financial ecosystem. I think this is the likely view. They view this as a strategic objective. One of the things that we saw in Chicago that I've mentioned a couple of times is that they saw that there was too much ground to cover for a small amount of activists and far left militants, and what they looked for was what they called strategic choke points. The Broadview ICE facility was one of them, and so they started holding direct action demonstrations. The Portland ICE facility, direct action demonstrations, trying to use the fewest amount of resources necessary to disrupt ICE operations as much as possible. I think in this case, this is something similar, because they're likely going to use these lists to create targets, basically for protests from the anti-ICE organized resistance, for direct action demonstrations, and even direct actions. We've already seen a few far left affinity groups conduct similar direct actions, not just at the hotels that are housing ICE, but also at nationwide rental car companies that have rented cars to ICE, at one in Portland that we covered last week. So I expect the focus, the targeting of these private businesses to increase as they start building out these target sets and publishing them. All right, well, that's the end of our briefing for today. Jared, if you could get us started on some questions, please. From Bad Wabbit, the Democrats holding their own State of the Union is a huge escalation and again attempts to undermine the administration, furthering the loss of credibility of our government, as well as the divide in DC. What do you see as the major takeaways regarding our color revolution and this action? Well, I agree. Yeah, this is an escalation of the Trump resistance, because what they're trying to do is establish that the Trump administration is illegitimate, that they are the legitimate potential government. And I expect that they're going to do more, like the future states of the union. They're going to do the same thing. But this is it's not, they're not at the point yet of flipping the switch on the color revolution. I think this is just another way of going after the legitimacy of the Trump administration. And they're not even necessarily united on this. I think is the point that Mike has made, is that there's not a monolithic entity here. There are, within the Trump resistance, there are multiple efforts, that many of them going in the same direction, but have differing tactics or differing goals. In this case, Democrats aren't united either, because there are, I think, right now, I only know of a handful of Democrats that are supposed to be going to this, but there are many that are going to attend the State of the Union. Some of them that are going to do it in a silent protest, and some that are just going to skip it. So they're not quite united on it. They're not even quite united on it themselves, much less, the divide with it between the parties. Next question, please. From Brown Smock 739. Hey guys, I'm working through my area study and curious what y'all consider significant physical terrain considerations with urban environments. Well, that's an interesting question, because I don't really live in like a major urban environment, but terrain considerations. One of the things, if I was concerned about a urban environment, would be maybe the crime levels of different parts of the city, in population density, and different parts of whatever city you live in. Then I would also think about the critical infrastructure. Where different pieces of critical infrastructure are placed throughout your city, whether that's like power transformers, power generation, pure water treatment facilities. But we'll also save this question for Mike. He is obviously the area study guru and will probably have a better answer. Next question, please, Jared. From Frozen Nomad, is the Canadian recruitment move aimed at towards some specific nation citizens, such as the UK or other British Commonwealth countries?
I tried and I could not find a list for that. My assumption is yes, Commonwealth countries, and then they have a preference for French-speaking nations as well. Just explicitly, we want French-speaking people here. That said, that assumption is based off of Canada's old foreign policy, not their new foreign policy. So it is due for reassessment there. India, I think, is the main concern here, because India is not trustworthy with intelligence, and India is also quite entrenched in Canada. With China, they do have that new strategic partnership. I'm trying to figure out where exactly they're going to go with that, if they are going to be as lenient as they have been with India. Frankly, there's just too many unknowns to make a good assessment at this time on who exactly they're going to target with it.
All right, our next question, I think, is also on this topic. Regarding Canada recruiting foreign military members, could you speak to our security issues and the odds of Canada recruiting Chinese into their military, since they have just created these new agreements with China?
Yeah, for the time being, just due to history, I'm assuming that that recruitment of Chinese is low. That said, I'm willing to change my mind on that given the new strategic partnership agreements. Uh, and again, the main concern here is going to be India, because India is a wild card on the world stage anyway. They cannot be trusted with secrets, just plain and simple. They're not. They've proven themselves to play both sides at all times and do whatever is good for them. So if you have divulged things to them, if you've allowed them into their military, they're going to use that to their advantage. And sometimes that may mean that they're going to sell secrets. That's just how they are. It's yeah, I'll leave it there. Like I said, it's still a lot of variables to nail down before I make a good assessment on this.
Well, so I think my thought on this, is that this is not an attempt by the Canadian government to fill Canada's military with foreign spies necessarily. This is a response to, as far as I understand, the Canadian military has the same recruitment problems the U.S. military had throughout the Biden administration is multiple times worse in Canada right now. Like I read an article the other day that a significant proportion of their new recruits basically leave as soon as they can. And they're having problems recruiting Native Canadians to go into the military. And the solution here, like I think many of the European and the Canadian government, to things like the population, or their view of the population crisis is we have to import more foreigners. In this case, the recruitment crisis for the military, instead of turning things around like the Trump administration tried to do, is to import more foreigners to fill the military. I think it's entirely the most graceful reading of it is that it's because they need more bodies, not because they are necessarily trying to import foreign spies.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I don't think they're trying to import foreign spies. I think that's just going to be a result of the actions of trying to fill the ranks with foreigners. That's especially like the requirement for you must have 10 years of foreign military service to apply. That to me seems like a setup for a foreign military to go, hey, you've had 10 years of honorable service. We need you to, you know, go to the Canadian military and send us back information.
All right.
That seems like a massive vulnerability to me.
All right. I see. I just, before we get to their next question, I do see a comment from Brian Edminster. 287G cooperation was just outlawed by the Maryland General Assembly and signed into law by the governor. Yeah, this is one of the things the states have been doing, Democrat-controlled states have been doing to get around these 287G agreements. So the 287G has been around for a long time now. They were the Obama administration stopped using them in 2012. The Trump administration brought them back, and then you started to see the spread of these sanctuary jurisdictions. And the states are, a lot of the Democrat-controlled states are still want to hinder the capacity of the Trump administration to enact deportations. And this is one of the things I've seen multiple proposals in multiple states to do the same thing, to start out by basically outlawing these 287G agreements. I think Virginia, they didn't, the Virginia government hasn't done that yet. I think because it requires legislation, but the governor, Abigail Spanberger, did stop those agreements with the state level police. And I expect to see more of that happening in Democrat-controlled states. Well, maybe not Minnesota now, but a lot of the expansion of these bans on 287G agreements. All right, next question, please, Jared. From Coach SUT, I heard of a report that there's a 22% chance of a military coup because the Army officials do not like Teal Vance Trump. Have you heard anything similar? I have not heard that. Next question, please, Jared. From Heather Ryan. Where has Mike been so much lately? It kind of looks like you two are doing the show pretty good on your own. I do hope that Mike is okay. Mike is, in addition to what he's put out on social media, he's also been working very hard on his new book that he's trying to put out as soon as possible. So a lot of the times that Jared and I have been covering down is because Mike is writing. Next question, please. From Thomas Jefferson on X. I've seen an increase of people exposing different kinds of government-funded fraud. Has there been any talk about increased law enforcement activity targeting these fraudulent operations? I think one of the major obstacles to the Trump administration on prosecuting fraud has been just the capacity to investigate it. because there is, as you said, there is a lot of it. And some of it isn't fraud either. Some of it is, it's not necessarily illegal. That was I think that was the problem that a lot of people ran into with Doge, is that the perception of a lot of Americans is that money going out of the federal government to people is illegal, that it's fraud and abuse. But for the most part, a lot of it was done legally. A lot of the patronage that's sent out from federal grants and stuff is done legally. In the case of the actual fraud, it is pretty expansive. And I think that's why there's been a big push to get people involved in investigating. They've been putting up these what are effectively bounties, whistleblower bounties, because you can, under the False Claims Act, what that does is allow a citizen to bring a claim against a grant recipient or a federal contractor or a private company that gets federal money on behalf of the government. And the Trump administration has been establishing these bounty programs to basically pay people a percentage of whatever is able to be clawed back. And so the Trump administration, I think, is right now building up, or trying to build up, that capacity to actually pour through all of this data and find that fraud, so they can use things like the False Claims Act, and then actually possibly go after these people with prosecutions, because there's just a limited capacity when it comes to only using federal agents to do this. There have been prosecutions, obviously in the Somali daycare fraud situation, but some of that doesn't make the news. Like with immigration enforcement in general, I see a lot of pushback on the Trump administration about targeting worksite employers that employ illegal aliens. There have been arrests, there have been worksite raids. They just don't make the national news. As far as I understand, there's been quite a few in Texas, for example. Next question, please, Jared. From Wayne T. President Trump has come up with another key argument for why Britain must not give away the key Indian Ocean territory and military base in the Indian Ocean. Diego Garcia. I thought this was a non-event gone away.
So it is not a non-event. The last reporting we had on it was that the U.S. military is going to remain there regardless of what happens. That's not a non-event. That's saying, no, we're willing to take this base if we really need to. Trump didn't just come up with this argument. That's hey, we can strike from Diego Garcia, something that even I've said on our beta site here as we've been testing things that showed, hey, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you can do from Diego Garcia. It has not gone away. This issue is not going to go away until Britain stops doing what it's doing, cuts out the lease talk, or the United States military simply takes the base, which Trump put back on the table.
All right, next question, please. From Dan in Texas, isn't there a customary rebuttal of an out of power party to the State of Union address? Yeah, there usually is. They do like a televised basically response. I think in this case, especially based on who is going to be attending it, that it's going to be turned into a Trump resistance event. They even specifically called it a counter programming event. Next question, please, Jared. From Sobriety for Reality, could AFL-CIO involvement in a general strike backfire due to industrial unions are more conservative than SEIU unions? It's possible. That's one of the things in 2024 that happened, is like with the Teamsters, for example, was that there are a lot of rank and file union members that are conservative. It's not a huge 80-20 or 90-10 situation where 90% of unionized members, especially in the actual blue collar unions, have are Democrats or like left wing, and like in the Teamsters situation that led to Sean O'Brien not endorsing a candidate ahead of the 2024 election. So yeah, there could be a divide here, but I think some of it's not going to be a huge like a major break, like an 80-20 break between the rank and file and the leadership either. It's going to be split like most partisan issues, most partisanship in the United States. Like in the states, there's no 90-10 state, no 80-20 state. Most states are 55-45 roughly. Most of these partisan issues are 55-45, one way or the other. Next question, please, Jared.
We are all caught up.
All right. Well, if that's we'll give you guys a couple more seconds to get some questions in. But if that is the end of our questions for today, we will be back with you on this show and in your inbox at 08 Central.
Wait.
Oh, one more question right before we sign off. From Frozen Nomad, taking your best guess, should Iran talks break down, are we most likely to see more limited targeted strikes like before, or something bigger in scope to try to destabilize the regime?
Best guess is targeted strikes. The Trump administration has been very, very favorable toward that. Looking at Midnight Hammer, looking at Absolute Resolve, they love to go in, make a show of it, hit it, be done, and have somebody home in time for the next meal. Look, that's what happened in Midnight Hammer and Absolute Resolve.
Yeah, to me, that's what the indicators say. Yeah, but wait, there's more. That's what the indicators to me point to.
Yeah.
A strike, a discombobulation, if you will, because that's the Trump administration has been doing pushing for what I think would be better described as regime compliance or regime acquiescence rather than regime change. That's what happened in Venezuela. So there's criticism of the Trump operation against Maduro because he left Maduro's vice president in charge. Well, I think it became pretty clear right after that the reason for that is because that promotes stability. That was the opposite of what we did in Iraq, which was de-Baathification. Because in Iraq, in order to become a government official, you had to be a member of the Ba'ath Party. And when we did de-Baathification, that meant, one, we got rid of all of the competent administrators who might not even be ideologically committed to Baathism. And then we created a destabilizing force because now all those people who know how to run a government are out of power and basically blackballed. And they were trying to avoid that. From what I could tell, they're trying to avoid that with Venezuela. I think that's what they would try to do with Iran. If they went further than just airstrikes, it would be something similar to the Maduro operation. If they want to get rid of the Ayatollah Khomeini, there is a parallel government that already exists. There's two governments in Iran. There's the religious government, the 12er Shia Islam government, and there's the secular government. So there is a position here to conduct regime acquiescence. And if it went further than strikes, I think that's much more likely than because I've seen a lot of speculation and then some alleged reports coming out like Axios, New York Times, saying that there's going to be boots on the ground. Another big political commentator saying that we're gonna invade Iran in coordination with Israel. I don't think that's happening. I think it's not impossible, but I don't want to say that it's impossible. But I think the indicators for now point to airstrikes and at the most a discombobulation operation, so to speak.
Yeah, just to kind of put a real fine point on that, the forces being assembled are all about air dominance and airstrikes. There's the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, which is a Nimitz class carrier surrounded by destroyers, ideal for surface warfare and annihilating things along the coast. Not ideal for invasion. The next one coming up, the Ford, same thing but better. They also are not an invasion force. Not to mention the total troop count there is considerably lower than basically any invasion the U.S. has ever conducted. Even the one in Kuwait had almost 300,000 people. This is not an invasion force we're seeing. This is a precision strike force being built up.
Then Frozen Nomad, the way you two describe it, it almost sounds like there are at least a few adults in the room making decisions. I think this is a deliberate, this regime acquiescence idea. They're not calling it that. I just called it that. Based on my perception of what they're doing, is a response to the GWAT, to the global war on terror in Iraq and Afghanistan. There are a lot of guys who were in the GWAT in the Trump administration that looked at de-Baathification and then the overthrow of the Taliban government in Afghanistan and trying to implement a whole new government with Not even all of the Northern Alliance guys. I mean, some of those guys were marginalized by Karzai and his people. So they tried to establish a whole new government, and neither one of them really. One of them became courted by Iran and became much closer to Iran, and the other just collapsed immediately as soon as we were leaving. So I think they're looking at the GWAT debathification and Hamid Karzai, putting him in power and his people in power, and trying to do the opposite of that, trying to maintain stability and pressure those stable governments who may not be ideologically 100% ideologically in lockstep with Maduro or Khomeini to acquiesce to what the United States wants, not necessarily expecting everything, but at least to not interfere with the foreign policy goals of the United States. In Iran's case, I think that's the part of this pivot to Asia. They don't want Iran running around knocking things over because the Trump administration wants to pivot away from the Middle East and not make it the central strategic focus of American grand strategy.
Yeah, there are, I mean, speaking of decision makers, there are three people that immediately come to mind with this. First off, the VP, he is a GWAT veteran. The Secretary of Defense War, also a GWAT veteran and known to be a bit of an outsider, and it has shown himself to somewhat be somebody who thinks outside the box. And lastly, the Undersecretary of War for Policy, Elbridge Colby. We mentioned him a lot on this show. His whole thing, he's not personally affected by it, not a GWAT veteran, but his whole thing has been pivot away from the Middle East and into Asia to address the China issue. He wrote a book on that 5 years ago, and it's personally, I think that's been affecting foreign policy even against the Biden administration's wishes. Just there were some things that came out of it that conformed to that and did not conform to what we expected out of the administration there.
All right. Next question from Bad Wabbit is, if we're going to have a watch party on the night of the State of the Union, we could.
Yeah, we'll run.
I don't think it'd be a problem with that. Yeah. And then I did see another question before this from Sobriety for Reality. Why are there ads in the live stream? That has nothing to do with us. I think that has to do with YouTube.
Yeah. We monetize the streams, and if we monetize them, YouTube does its thing. Just is what it is. But we have to monetize.
All right. And then another question from Wayne. The Trump administration blocked what would be the largest copper, gold, silver, and molybdenum extraction site in the United States. The DOJ filed a 143-page brief Tuesday defending the Biden EPA's 2023 veto of the Pebble Mine project in Alaska's Bristol Bay region. Why? I'm not sure. I have to take a look at what they actually said in the filing, which I'll look for it today. It might not be publicly available, the actual filing itself, but I'll look and see what reason they gave before I say why I think they might have. Any more questions, Jared?
Nope. We are all caught up.
All right. Well, now, if that is the end of our questions for today, we'll be back with you in your inbox and on this show at 08 Central. Have a good rest of your day and stay out front.